All right, let's do this. I told you I was going to bring you a second video talking about how a buyer can get out of a contract. So I'm Edwin Liddy. I'm with the Liddy Real Estate Group, brokered by JP and Associate Realtors out of Grapevine, Texas. Now, focusing on Texas, okay? So if you're not in Texas, this may not be applicable to you. But what I'm going to go over is actually the 1 to 4 family contract that we use here in the state of Texas. And it heavily favors ways a buyer can get out of the deal. All right, even though it's a contract between a buyer and a seller, I guess the state feels, you know what, let's protect the buyer at all costs, and we'll throw little things in there to protect the seller. But anyway, let's go from the beginning. So first off, the parties to the actual contract. You have a buyer, you have a seller, okay, or you have an entity, LLC or whatever, but it has to be accurate. So if the buyer's information is incorrect or the seller's information is incorrect, at the end of the day, or before the contract is up, the buyer can get out the deal because the contract is between parties. So if the contract is between, let's just say, for example, party number A, party letter A, and party letter C as the seller. A is the buyer, C is the seller. And the title does their due diligence and they look into the different parties' names to make sure everybody's legit, and they find out that actually the buyer's information is wrong, that person doesn't exist, the buyer can get out the deal. If the seller's information is incorrect, maybe there are other entities that are a part of that transaction that need to be a part, the buyer can get out of that deal. So the parties to the deal have to be accurate. If not, the buyer can get out of actually purchasing that home. And that, I mean, if the realtor does their due diligence and actually goes off a valid driver's license, real driver's license, then there shouldn't be a problem where this is concerned. And if there's an LLC, then typically you add an addendum stating that, you know what, this person is representing the interest of this LLC. But at the end of the day, that's another way a buyer can get out the deal. We're going to roll right into the second one. Number 2 is property. So the property, you describe the actual lot and block number, the address, the subdivision, and then the complete address as it's known. Remember, you're going under contract to purchase a property, a specific property. This information has to be correct. If it's not correct, if it's not correct, a buyer can get out of actually buying the home. So if the lot should have been number 1 and the block number 2, but you've got the lot is 5 and the block is 10, then you're buying another property that doesn't exist. That wasn't what you intended, right? So basically the buyer can get out of the deal. A seller is not aware of any leases affecting the property, and after the effective date of this actual contract, so the date they go live, it goes under contract, the seller may not, without the buyer written consent, create a new lease, amend an existing lease, or convey any interest in the property. So you go under contract, you're the buyer with a seller for a particular house, and there are no leases. Basically, there's nobody living there, it's not being rented out, but the seller decides after you go under contract to stick a tenant in there and take a lease. You as the buyer can get out of that contract because that lease did not exist prior to going under contract. So maybe they need to get some money to continue to pay the mortgage or whatever it is, and they're trying to stick somebody in there on a month to month. Yeah, that's not, according to the way the contract's written, as the buyer, you can simply say, you did what? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna back out of this deal because you failed to fulfill the details of the contract. Another way you can get out the contract with leases is if, and it's actually in here, sometimes there's natural resources and maybe there's oil or gas or whatever it is on the land, and the seller has a contract for those resources with a third party. Well, this is saying if the seller has not delivered to the buyer a copy of all the natural resource leases, then the seller shall provide to the buyer a copy of the natural resource leases within 3 days after the effective date. All right, so you've got 3 days after you go on the contract as a seller to provide to the buyer a copy of the contract for those natural resource leases. Then it says the buyer may terminate the contract within blank days after the date the buyer receives all the natural resource leases, and the earnest money shall be returned into the buyer. Now, earnest money is something that you give as consideration. It's like good faith money. There's no set amount, but typically here in Texas, it's 1% on average, right? You get that back. So after you get the actual natural resource lease, and let's say you don't like the terms, let's say you don't like the fact that there's a lease period, you can as a buyer, you can get out of that deal and you don't have to move forward. All right, so that's another way out as a buyer, okay? Now, earnest money and termination option fee, they're all due within 3 days after you've gone on the contract. I hate to say this in video, but I've seen many investors who really don't have money. They'll go under contract and promise the world because they know they got 3 days to deliver the earnest money and the option money, and they will drag their foot and not deliver the earnest money, which let's say is 1% of the sales price. And what they'll do is at the last second, they'll do their inspections the very next day after going on the contract because they know they got 3 days. So they'll do all their inspections and they'll realize maybe it's too much work or it's going to cost too much or it's a bad investment for them. So they won't deliver the earnest money, but they'll give the option money to get out of the deal. So let's say that the option money was agreed upon $50 or $100. They'll give that and they'll just walk away. And because they never gave earnest money, they don't have to get it back. I've seen this happen plenty of times and it's just bad business. But that's another way a buyer can get out if you're shady like that, I guess. Yeah, sorry to say that, but yeah. Another way you can get out though as a buyer is you actually give your earnest money, you go under contract and you actually intend to actually buy the house. And you give an option period. You want an option period, so you pay for one. And the option period is just what it sounds like. It gives you the option to walk away for any reason whatsoever. So let's say you submit your earnest money within 3 days and you give the $50 or $100 or $150, whatever it is agreed upon. What you're paying for is an opportunity to do your due diligence. And for any reason, you could walk away within that time frame, which is a beautiful thing. And I encourage during that option period, all of my buyers to go ahead and do their due diligence, do all of your inspections, get your peace of mind. This way you know exactly what you're walking into before you buy the house. And when I say you can terminate for any reason within that time frame, you could sneeze too hard and achoo! Yeah, I don't want to buy the house no more. You don't even got to do inspections. You can just decide during that time frame that you know what, you don't want to move forward. Now, keep in mind that I'm going over, and I should have disclosed this. This is a contract that's used to purchase pre-existing homes. So if you're buying a brand new builder's home, it's a 99.9% chance you're not using a Texas Real Estate Commission actual contract, because typically the builders like to use what their attorney drafts up to protect their best interests. And if you like this video, go ahead and share it with someone, please, and like. This way I can keep it going and lets me know that I'm delivering good content. It dawned upon me the other day that I live in the world of real estate, so I understand it. I know the contracts, I understand the verbiage. But for those that just want to buy a house or sell a house, you're not privy to the details of until you're in that situation. So I was talking to a few people, and I was just talking and giving them information. They said, "Man, that is good stuff." And so I said, "Let me just put it in the video so you have access to it too." Anyway, so another way you can get out is once you've gone on the contract, the title company's involved, and they start to do their due diligence. They start to go back and create a title policy and look at the chain of ownership and make sure that ownership could be transferred smoothly from one party to the next, right? So they provide a title, a commitment within 20 days. You receive this commitment as the buyer and you go, you know what? I don't like what's in it. Basically, there's things in it that you don't agree to. You can walk away. You get that title commitment and you either like it or you don't like it. Or if the title company cannot issue a commitment for whatever reason, as the buyer, you can walk away because you're not going to be able to buy that house under those circumstances anyway. If the commitment is not delivered in a timely manner as a buyer, you can walk away. It's kind of a big deal, right? So, and I'll read this. It says, if the commitment and the exception documents are not delivered to the buyer within the specified time, the time for delivery will be automatically extended up to 15 days or 3 days before closing, whichever is earlier, if the commitment and exception documents are not delivered within the time required, the buyer may terminate this contract and get your earnest money back. Boom. Now the way you can get out is, let's say you want to buy this house for specific reasons. You want to buy this house because you have a home business. You want to buy this house because you intend to put a swimming pool in the backyard as an oasis. You have everything planned out in your head. Or one that I encountered, you want to buy this house because there are no HOAs and you drive a big rig that you need to park in front of the house to go to work, right? So when you're writing the actual contract under the objections, we would write in there, you intend to purchase this house so you can park your big rig in front, or you intend to purchase to install a swimming pool, and these are the dimensions, or you intend to purchase this house to operate a home business, a daycare, whatever it is. That goes into that line item. Now, when the title company does their due diligence and they get the deed restrictions back, they present it to you, and let's say you cannot park your truck outside and you cannot put a swimming pool for some reason, or you cannot have a home business in that area just because of the restrictions that were written in prior to. As a buyer, you can walk away from the deal and yes, get your earnest money back. You really need to know this stuff. I think it's important. You know, as a people kind of hesitate to buy a house, they don't realize there are so many different ways for you to get out. And it's not really about you getting out, right? It's really about you being able to move forward with the different areas that meet the needs that you have as a homeowner. Why would you want to buy a house if your intention were to put a swimming pool and you can't put one in, right? What if that clause wasn't in there and you purchased the house and then you realize, oh, I can't put one in after the fact and you didn't know? So these are actually, these clauses, they're in there to help you make a good decision and not get stuck, basically, as a buyer. All right, property conditions. So a seller is required under Texas law, if they're selling the house, to provide you with something called a seller disclosure. And the seller's disclosure is in the name. The seller disclosing, what's wrong with the house. A lot of people like to use Seller Shield because it's more convenient. But basically, it's yes, no, or unknown. And it's a list of questions that talk about the house. Is the electrical working? Yes, no, unknown. And that's just an example, but to give you an idea. And you go through and they have to sign off and say, well, to the best of my knowledge, as of this date and time, this is what I know of the property. Now, on the contract, there are options. The first box says the buyer has received notice. If that box is checked, that simply means that before you went under contract, your realtor gave you a copy of the seller disclosure notice and you signed it. So if you signed it as the buyer, you're saying you received the seller disclosure and you're okay with it to move forward. It doesn't mean you're signing it saying I'm okay with it and I'm gonna take the house as is. What it means is I'm okay with moving forward, and you continue to do your due diligence. However, box number 2 says the buyer has not received a notice, but within blank number of days of the effective contract, the seller shall deliver to the buyer the notice. Now, this is very important because if that box is checked and as the buyer you didn't receive the seller's disclosure within a certain amount of days, it says if the buyer does not receive the notice, the buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to closing and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. That's another out. It also says if the seller delivers the notice, the buyer may terminate this contract for any reason within 7 days after the buyer receives the notice or prior to closing, whichever occurs first. And the earnest money, guess what? Goes right back to the buyer. If you never got the seller's disclosure and they're saying they'll give it to you within a certain time, it's saying in black and white that if the buyer does not receive the notice, you may terminate the contract at any time. So let's say they said in 3 days you'll get it after you sign, and day number 4 comes and you still don't have it. You can terminate the deal and get your earnest money back. Let's say in 3 days' time you did receive it, just like they said. This is saying that basically you still have 7 days from the date you received it to walk away and get your money back, your earnest money back. So think about it. Let's say you're dealing with an agent who's lazy, that doesn't understand the process, and they're just, I don't know why they're an agent, but let's just say they say they'll get you the seller's disclosure in 7 days. Well, if I was representing you as the buyer, I would take that as an ace in my pocket and go, you know what? I think we need to get a 7-day option period that you pay for. That's 7 days, so you can walk away for any reason. And then in 7 days, they're gonna give you a seller's disclosure. That has nothing to do with the 7-day option period that you got. So you get an additional 7 days, basically, from the time they give it to you that you can walk away for any reason. That's 14 days. That's 14, and why that's big is because typically the time frame or the turnaround when you're dealing with a typical real estate transaction on average is 30 to 35 days. If you've got 14 days to walk away for any reason whatsoever, I think you should take that, right? You just never know what's gonna happen in 14 days. But anyway, I'd have to be representing you to tell you that, or you take my little 2 cents from the video and run with it, but be careful who's representing you, because a lot of these agents, they're not on top of their game. They just kind of go with the flow and they just do whatever. But you really need somebody. There's some great agents out there. I've met quite a few. You need somebody in your corner that's going to have your back and make sure they represent your best interest. Another way you can get out as a buyer is if the lender comes back and says, you know what, we were going to finance the deal, but the house needs a lot of work. Okay, now this says in the contract, it says that if the cost of lender required repairs and treatment exceeds 5% of the sales price, the buyer may terminate this contract, and yes, the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. You see this a lot on FHA loans, investment properties, anything where the house needs a lot of work. Not a whole lot on conventional, but when you're dealing with FHA, they're real strict. I mean, if they come in and like the house is tore up, they will not move forward with that deal unless those repairs are done. And if it costs too much to do the repairs, they won't finance it. Yeah. This is also why you see like a lot of fixer-uppers and investment properties. You'll see they won't entertain any offers that are FHA because they know, or even VA, because they know that those lenders are very strict. And chances are it won't make it to the closing table, but it would have tied up 21 days in the process just to say, no, we're not going to move forward. But that's just another way you can get out of the deal. So I hope you guys are enjoying this video so far. We're almost done. Another way is casualty loss. So if any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire or other casualty items or let's say Mother Nature or whatever, then the seller shall restore the property to its previous condition as soon as reasonably possible, but in any event by the closing date. And if the seller fails to do so, to factors beyond the seller's control, the buyer may terminate, and the contract will be void, and the earnest money shall be returned. That's always a bad one, where something beyond your control happens, tornado, or a tree falls on the house, or a fire. Realistically, what are the odds of you restoring the house back to its condition within, 30 days? Probably won't happen, especially with the adjusters, with these insurance companies. It'll take them 21 days just to get you a check in most cases. So yeah, in an event that something like that happens when you're under contract, God forbid, the buyer can walk away, all right? So that's just another out. So yeah, the buyer has several different ways that they can walk away from a deal. I'm gonna give you a few more. So let's go to third-party financing addendum, which is normally attached to offers when there's a lender involved. And we'll just start from the top. So on that, the very first one, conventional loan. It says a first mortgage loan in the principal amount of blank. So whatever that number is, let's say 300,000, 400,000, whatever, 700,000. It says excluding any financed PMI due in blank years, that's normally 30, with the interest rate not to exceed blank %. If you were under the assumption as a buyer that you were gonna get a loan at a certain interest rate, so let's say we put in there, what's the market now, like 7%? We put 7%. It gets signed, we submit this with the offer, all parties agree. And then the lender comes back and says, hey, brother or sister, we got a problem. The 7%, yeah, that's not gonna work. It's more like 11%. Anything over the 7, anything that the parties agree to, as a buyer, you can get out of that deal. Let that sink in for a second. So basically, we told the parties that we're going to go under contract and you're going to get a loan, and the interest rate is not going to exceed whatever that number is. If it exceeds that, as a buyer, you can get out of that deal. Now the way out as a buyer. Yes. All right, as we scroll down, it says approval of financing. Time is of the essence for this paragraph, and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. So, option A says this contract is subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval, and if the buyer cannot obtain buyer approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller within blank days of the effective date of this contract, and the contract will terminate, and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. On average, I see anywhere between 15 and 21 days on this. After you go under contract, and people, buyers don't think like this, but they have a pre-approval, and a lot of time they think, well, I'm good, I have a pre-approval. A pre-approval is just a lender saying, okay, everything looks good from the outside. You can proceed, make an offer on a house that costs X amount. Once you actually go under contract and they start gathering information, that's when they start the approval process. So that's what this is saying. Within a certain amount of days, you'll get fully approved to buy that house. And let's say you're not approved within those amount of days, you can walk away from the deal as the buyer. Another way you can walk away is if the lender just comes back and says, I can't approve you for whatever other reason. You can walk away from the deal as well. Okay, so there are so many different ways as a buyer that you can get out of buying a house if you're under contract. You just got to know the ways you can if you need to get out of the deal. Another way is if you're using an FHA or a VA loan, under number 4, line item, right above line item A, there's a blank that says a dollar amount. And basically what it's saying is, it says Department of Veteran Affairs or direct endorsement lender setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than blank. Or if the contract purchase price or cost exceeds the reasonable value. What they're saying is they want to know that the house is going to appraise for the dollar amount that they're giving you the loan for. So let's use, I don't know, 700,000, 800,000, whatever the number is. You plug your number in. When they do their due diligence and they send an appraiser out to check the value, they want to know that it's going to be worth that 700,000 or 800,000. They're not going to give you a loan for a house that, okay, it's worth 300,000, but you're trying to pay these people or whoever 700,000, 800,000. They're not going to do that because it's worth way less. They can never get their return back on their investment if for some reason they have to foreclose or get the house back from you. However, the reverse to that is if you're buying a house and let's say it's 700,000, 800,000 and it's worth 1.8 million, they would gladly give you a loan as long as you're approved to actually get the loan with your finances, your DTI, and all of that stuff. They'll gladly move forward because it's worth a lot more. They're actually investing in a product that's worth more than what you're asking for. But when it's worth less, no bueno. They're not going to move forward. They're going to say no. Now, by all means, in most cases, you can turn around and say, well, I'll pay the difference. Sometimes that happens where, if you're not that far off, let's say 5,000, 10,000, you'll pay the difference. Or I've seen this happen where the buyer's agent goes to the seller's agent, hey, where the appraisal is off, the value came back a little low, we're off by 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. And in some cases, the seller goes, no, well, let's make this work. We'll amend the price to reflect a purchase price of what the house is actually worth. And if both parties agree upon that and the lender gives a thumbs up, in most cases, you can save the deal like that. But you're not obligated to. You can walk away as the buyer and get your earnest money back, all right? That's gonna be the saying that people are gonna be saying, get your earnest money back. Another way that you can get out as a buyer is if the seller fails to disclose anything. Let's say they fail to disclose that there's a PID, it's a public improvement district, and you pay a separate tax on that, and it's a certain dollar amount that you pay, and they just don't disclose it, and you find out 3 days before closing. As a buyer, you can get out because it was not disclosed. Anything that wasn't disclosed or agreed upon, you can get out of the deal. Let's just say they said there's no HOA, and you find out halfway through, oh, wait, there's an HOA? But they said there was no HOA. You can get out of the deal. So anything not disclosed, you can get out of the deal. So anyway, those are some ways that you can get out the deal as a buyer. There are a few others. I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but there are some other ways you can get out. But for the most part, these are really the bread and butter of how you can, if you're buying a house, how you can get out of the contract, the different outs as a buyer. And as you can see, I didn't say anything about the seller, right? I mean, seller got to kind of sit back and enjoy the ride and hope the buyer makes it to the finish line when they're trying to sell their house here in Texas. A way a seller can get out is if the buyer doesn't give their earnest money in time, the seller can get out that way. But, but for the most part, the contract that is written, the Texas Real Estate Commission contract, a 1-to-4 family, really favors the buyer, heavily favors the buyer, like you wouldn't believe. All right. But anyway, my name's Edwin Liddy. I hope this helps somebody. Go ahead and share this video, like this video, and let's get the word out. But these are ways that a buyer can get out of a contract to buy a home in Texas under the Texas Real Estate Commission 1-to-4 family contract. I hope this helps. I'll see you in the next video.